I'm sure you love your partner. You may have even stood next to them with all your friends around and promised to keep loving them forever. But that doesn't mean everything is easy. And having conversations about difficult things can be hard. I'm not even talking about the conversations about things within your relationship. I mean the ones about your stress at work or a problem with someone else you care about, things you're dealing with outside the relationship. How do you open that door without the stress walking in through it with you? Dr. Rachel Hannam is the director of North Brisbane Psychologists. Dr. Rachel, what is a stress-reducing conversation?
Hi, Kat. Well, it's kind of the "how was your day, honey" conversation, but with guidelines to make it more effective by opening up a dialogue that prioritises understanding over giving advice. And it's a conversation that you have with your partner where your partner has a grievance or a gripe about somebody else, not about you. It might be their boss or their co-worker, a neighbour, an extended family. Could even be about one of your children, although that obviously can be more triggering. That makes it hard to listen with empathy, but it's a process that uses active listening where we encourage people to use this active listening in a way that, helps their partner relax and feel understood.
What sorts of groundwork should you lay before you open the conversation?
So I guess the ground rules of the stress-reducing conversation are that it's only about listening and about empathy, not about judgment or giving advice. Don't minimise your partner's concerns. If you both have complaints about your day at work or whatever, take turns and really give your partner about 10 or 15 minutes just to talk about their problems without interrupting or giving advice. Like I said, take that sort of you and me against the world attitude so that your partner feels like you're on their side.
That's an interesting one, feeling that they're on your side. What if you think they're wrong or they think you're wrong?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky one. I guess we have to prioritise our relationship over being right. And you may get a chance down the line a little bit to give your perspective or, ask if it's okay to give advice. But in the first instance, I would just say listen and reflect back the emotions that you're hearing. If your partner is telling a story about work, you can still say, it sounds like you're really upset and frustrated about that. Tell me why you're so frustrated. So, you might want to wait till they've got all the story out and the emotions out and started to relax before you say, could I give you my take on it, or do you mind if I give you a bit of advice or a suggestion? They're going to be much more likely to hear it once they relax.
Dr. Rachel Hannam is the director of North Brisbane Psychologists. Dr. Rachel, what are the common mistakes you think people make when they try and get into or out of one of these conversations?
One of the common mistakes people make is they minimise. So they say, don't worry about it, just ignore him. It's not really a big deal. So that's minimising their partner's emotions. Sometimes also partners can seem very disinterested, maybe even a bit cold. They don't say anything at all, maybe because they don't know what to say. But it certainly doesn't help their partner to feel understood. And like I've already mentioned, giving advice, sort of interrupting with advice, just implies to your partner that you don't trust and respect them to figure it out for themselves. And like I mentioned, if you really, really want to give advice, just wait a little bit and then ask permission first.
That's such a tricky one, Rachel, and I hope this isn't an overshare. He's listening, so we'll find out together. Hi, honey. But my darling husband, who I have adored for 20 years, which is exactly the amount of time I've known him, and will continue to adore him, he tries to fix my problems if I share them, and it drives me nuts. I get that he wants to make it better, but I'm quite clever, Rachel, and I can figure. Thank you. I can figure things out. I want to share it. I want to vent. I want it understood. But I also understand that that's very much a part of who he is and how he shows that he loves me, is that he wants to make it all better. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, exactly. I think even me as a therapist, when my job is to acknowledge and empathise before giving any sort of advice or strategies, I can feel that impulse in me to want to fix it, because when you care about somebody, you do want to help them solve their problem. But as you've implied, sometimes the thing we need most of all is some acknowledgement and empathy, just having that compassionate witness to our suffering can be really powerful when we're in distress. That empathy causes us to relax, and then when we're relaxed, either we find our own answers or we're more receptive to other people's advice then.
Yeah, sometimes just hearing it said out loud, even if it's in your own voice, makes it a little bit clearer. What do you do if one of you is just naturally sunny and the other perhaps a little more introspective or a little, to keep the analogy going, darker? If your instinct is you'll be fine or don't give it too much energy because you are a sunny human and the other one is less so, how do you find a way through that?
Do you mean if you are the one who wants to, brighten things up for your partner?
Yeah, I think if it's your natural instinct to see the light, and you want your partner to feel that way too because you see them feeling sad. So how, on either side of that, if you're the one that's you don't want to be puppies and unicorns, it's just not the way you are, or you're the one that is just kind of like, don't be so sad. And how do you find the happy medium in what is both your natural set?
Yeah. Look, I think there is a fine line that we walk as human beings because a degree of venting releases that built-up emotional energy that really does exist in our system when we've been going through a tough time. Most people find it necessary to have a moan, have a vent. But at some point it can turn into rumination, which in psychology means focusing for too long on our problems and on our distress, and it ends up wasting energy which we could be using to focus on possible solutions. So I guess a rule of thumb might be vent or allow your partner to vent for up to 15 minutes if needed, and then see if you can slowly turn your attention to what you can do about the situation, which might just be to change your mindset about it to one of more acceptance if you don't have any other choices.
Right. Dr. Rachel Hannam is the director of North Brisbane Psychologists. How would you recommend doing that then, Dr. Rachel? Can you set an egg timer on a I give you exactly a hard-boiled egg to tell me about your day.
That's right. Well, I think, sometimes partners come home and both of them are stressed from work, from kids, from maybe conflict with friends or family. And so taking turns is really important. Listening with affection, validating each other's emotions, taking each other's side. If people want to go and get the 8 principles for how to have stress-reducing conversations, they can go to the Gottman website, which is Gottman, GOTTMAN.com, and search stress-reducing conversations, and they can find the 8 principles on that website. But it's really about trying to build understanding and avoiding, giving advice which might invalidate the other person's emotions.
Is it okay to take these conversations to another trusted confidant if you feel it will create stress for either of you in the partnership? So if you don't want to stress your partner out, is it okay to take it outside the partnership, or will that threaten your intimacy?
Good question. I would say it's definitely okay to take it to somebody else, but be careful not to forget about your partner altogether. It's not wise to only rely on your partner for emotional support, but ideally they would still be one of the main sources of support and comfort for you. If you found that you've turned away from your partner because you feel judged or like they don't listen to you, then I think it's time to get a bit of help. The research does show that emotional attraction and emotional intimacy require active listening and empathy. But of course there are some days or some situations we just know intuitively that our partner needs a break from our ongoing issue, or it might be triggering for them. So, particularly things like grievances with extended family or parenting or exes or something. And this is where a couple of sessions with a good therapist might come in handy, or a trusted friend.
Where do you tell people to start if this stuff is hard, Rachel? If they're coming to you saying we're not having these conversations or they're not ending well, where do you tell them to start?
Well, sometimes, people don't see the reason for it. I'm sometimes looking for what their motivation is, and I will say this, research has shown that when we're more emotionally attracted and connected, this is just as important as physical attraction for having a great sex life. If you feel emotionally rejected by your partner, chances are you won't be in a good mood, won't want to make love. Sometimes I say to the husbands who aren't quite sold, this is a really good reason to try more active listening and see how it affects the level of emotional connection that you feel for one another. And then I would go on to give them some tips about the kinds of questions that they could ask, and even give them scripted phrases for things that they could say. It might feel a bit clunky or artificial at first, but actually people can naturalise the scripted phrases that I give them quite quickly in my experience, and they can start to become like a new script or a new dynamic in the relationship, which is much more effective.
And finally, Rachel, how do partners check in with each other during these conversations or after to see how they've gone on both sides?
Yeah, well, I think when we have given empathy and listened non-defensively and actively to another person, we sense their relaxation, their breathing slows down, their shoulders relax. But, you know, at the start of the conversation, I mentioned that sometimes I give scripted phrases. You know, using how and what as sentence starters can be a good idea. So often we say, are you okay? Or did you talk to your boss? And these sort of sentence starters might prompt yes/no answers, whereas words like what or how open up the dialogue. Sort of, what are you feeling? How was that for you? How are you feeling about it now? You know, this prompts your partner to identify for themselves what's going on, how they're feeling, be it relaxed or upset. So using open-ended questions that start with words like how and what tends to pave the way for a better conversation, a stress-reducing conversation.
Well, I found this conversation quite stress-reducing, Dr. Rachel. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kat.
That's Dr. Rachel Hannam, Director of North Brisbane Psychologists.